Welcome to Express and Refresh. I'm your host, Sabor Tahir. And today, ladies and gentlemen, it'll be the first time I actually do my movie review podcast or a movie review on this podcast. I know I promised all you guys that I was going to do it. Just haven't found the right time and everything, but I finally have the time today, and we are finally doing a review. And joining me is a very special guest, Mr. Sam Brooks from the Ridley Scott production company. Sam, how are you?
I'm very good, Sabor. Thank you for having me on. Excited to be
Oh,
here.
pleasure. All right, so Sam, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am a screenwriter living in LA. I moved out to LA. I'm from New Hampshire, near where you go to school, and I went out to Ireland for college, to the American College of Dublin. During the summer after my freshman year, I got offered an internship out here in LA at a company called Impact Theory, and came here for the summer. Had a lot of fun in the internship, and I guess they liked me because they asked me to come on full time. So I was faced with then like either I can make a bunch of money or a deep fine amount of money for me at the time, and like actually pursue my dream, or I can spend a bunch of money and learn about my dream. So for me, it was a pretty obvious decision. Everyone talks about like putting school on hold, which is usually key for dropping out. So I did either one of those, came out full time to LA, and I've been working so I was at Impact Theory for a year, and then I came over to Scott Free and RSA, which are both Ridley Scott's different production companies. And I've been working as an assistant there as a day job while I work on a bunch of different writing projects. And I've finally got a couple of paid gigs I'm working on that are going painfully slowly, but they're going. So I'm starting to see some progress in my career. I've got a podcast that I'm working on as well that I'm pretty excited about, called Screenwriter Survival Guide. That's basically a step-by-step breakdown of how to make it in this industry as a screenwriter. And it's kind of me learning along with you, that's what I love about it. And each one we're starting, like my first episode is just why you need to move to LA, how to move to LA, all that stuff. Second episode, how to get your first assistant gig. Third episode, how to like transition to become a working writer, which was super great advice for me. We had on some excellent guests so far. So yeah, don't finish listening to this episode first and then go listen to that, because I think it'll be great if you're a screenwriter.
For sure, guys. Yeah, definitely check out his podcast. A lot of great stuff out there. A lot of people want to go to LA, and this guy's already living the dream. He's in LA. He's got that portion done, but and now he's doing the hustles part, which,
Yep.
making LA is where a lot of us are at right now. Not all of us can go to USC, where they're kind of already there. But hey, us on the East
Yes.
Coast, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, wherever you guys are, got to learn from him. But now that we have that established, he is again Ridley Scott, works for Ridley Scott. So tell me, before we get into the review, did you actually get to watch free movies for Ridley Scott, or you technically have to pay still?
No, unfortunately, I used to work in a movie theater like you do, and then I got free movies then. But now, unfortunately, I've noticed the more you step up, the less free shit you get when it comes to that. So my roommate, for instance, was a writer on a major HBO show, and she did not get any. She still can't watch the show because they don't give her HBO. So it is, I do not get to watch free movies. I had to pay. I use my AMC Stubs A-list to watch The Last Duel.
Scott, picture. For me, what stood out to you? And I guess I'll go first. Well, to go into that, I think what really stood out to me was the style of this film. I really like how it was shot, and also how the story was told. I think it was more engaging, and it really got you a better understanding of the character. But really, how did you feel about this film, and what really stood out to you when you watched this?
So overall, I really enjoyed the film. I'd seen some conflicting reviews leading up to it that it was, some people were either loving it or they were really not liking it. And so I was usually that obviously means that the movie can be very hit or miss for people. And so I went into it with a little bit of trepidation. It's also like long. I'm a sucker for a 90-minute movie. This movie's like 2 hours and 2.5 hours or something. And it's just, I think that's too long. I think that's too long. I don't like movies that are that long. But I was surprised. My biggest takeaway, I think, was how quickly it seemed to go by. Like how fast. Like I feel like I sat down and then I was walking up, or getting up at the end. And I think that had something to do with maybe the fact I don't think this is a spoiler to say the story is told in kind of 3 like 45-minute chapters that are like the same story told from 3 different people's perspective. And I think that kind of element of it, some people said that made the film drag. To me, it made the film kind of feel faster, feel like it flowed better. And just they move from one sequence to another very fast. And I do not like when movies or TV shows, a lot of like new HBO shows do this, where they just linger on these scenes. They're twice as long as they need to be. They're just so that they just spread everything out as much as possible. And so what I really liked about this was, yes, even though it's this epic that spans, you've got castles and battles and, you know, a bunch of different, like, it's kind of Game of Thronesy in a way. It just felt like it was surprisingly easy to watch for a scene that has 2 brutal rape scenes in it. For a film that has 2 brutal rape scenes in it. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll definitely get into that stuff all later on. But I definitely agree with you. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, the style. I feel like, you know, when you have these long historical dramas, I mean, the problem with, you know, some of these movies and like a lot of things with this is that they're so long and it's really hard to get, you know, and tune into it. And nowadays too, when they speak like, you know, old English and stuff like that, you know, it's really hard to get into those old long movies. I mean, it's kind of what's hard for especially like, you know, our generation. So I think it was cool it was fascinating how he just, you know, cut it into 3 parts. I felt like it was more engaging and also more easier to follow along because you kind of saw the same story, but you kind of saw it change. So I thought that style, yeah, I definitely agree with you. It was like more engaging.
Yeah. And I'd never seen, so this film has been widely compared to Rashomon, because it's similar subject matter, and then it's also using the conflicting narrators and things like that. And I'd never seen that. So for me, it was kind of my first real experience seeing this particular kind of, to me, it was like very experimental system done, and little did I know that it's been around for 70 years. But you know, yeah, overall I think the style, like you said, and I think just the fact that you're really seeing every character, and you really start to feel for every character. So the first chapter you're feeling for one character and you're starting to think they're the hero, and then you slowly, the second chapter, you see, oh, okay, this person was actually kind of something else. And then then you realize in the third chapter, you're like, wait, even the second chapter, the way we thought about the first character in the second chapter was colored by the second character's feelings about the first character. And just the whole way it kind of peels back like it's an onion or something, where you figure out who these characters are slowly. And every time you think you know them, they're completely flipped on their head. It was very interesting.
I definitely agree with you, Sam. I mean, the best part, you know, about these 2 chapters is not only like, I think the problem sometimes when you have like, and you're cutting these films, you have to be worried, like, are you going to show the same scene or are you going to do the same thing, just a recut, but like different perspective. What this film did really was, first of all, in each chapter, even though they were meant to tell the same perspective in a story, it showed new scenes with each character. And it also really showed the relationships and kind of how everyone perceives the relationships. So I felt like that was really interesting. Like, it was so interesting how one character viewed the relationship in one way, whereas another character viewed their relationship in another way. I feel like that was really engaging, and it kind of just shows, you know, how, you know, different perspectives that are really to the movie, and it really got us a better understanding for these characters. So I definitely love that part. And let's talk about, you know, the acting and the actors in this film. Obviously, you have Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who, you know, we know are phenomenal actors and who've been in multiple movies together, most notably Good Will Hunting, which I believe was their first movie. And they also wrote that movie, and they also wrote this movie. So very interesting how that.
And this is, I believe, their first time co-writing a movie since Good Will Hunting.
Exactly. So, you know, a lot of things to get in there, but I really like their performance as well. Matt Damon, especially. I loved his performance. I thought it's a new role for him. It was his second time working with Ridley Scott. First time with The Martian, he got an Oscar nom for that. So, you know, to work with him in this one, I thought he was phenomenal. You know, and one thing that kind of worried me was kind of like, you know, playing into the role and kind of not being authentic. For the most part, I thought they were very authentic with, you know, the storyline and everything. But I love Matt Damon and Adam Driver. I mean, I love Adam Driver, even though the Star Wars movies were interesting and Kylo Ren, I feel like they misused his character. I think I like Adam Driver a lot more in this movie, and I really want to go see his other pictures. I loved Adam Driver just a lot more. I think he performed excellently. And Jodie Comer, honestly, I kind of feel bad for her a little bit because she had to be with so many men. I mean, this is the fourth. She's been with 4 different men in the past 3 months. She's been with Ryan Reynolds, the
Oh,
other
is she Free
character.
Guy? She
She
in
saw
Free
Free
Guy?
Guy. She was in Free Guy, so I saw that. She was with a couple men in that movie, and now she's with a couple men in this movie. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel bad that she's kind of been overplayed, but so far, she's hanging in there, and I
Yeah.
respect so much about a Jodie Comer. But
Well, that's not me, and everyone kind of knows that isn't me that's doing this. And I just felt like Matt Damon went so heavily into this guy is just not a good, like he's just has no redeeming qualities. Not even that he's evil. I think you could I don't think any of the characters are really evil, but I think um Adam Driver's character obviously is just does worse stuff throughout the movie. He makes extremely bad decisions and extremely obviously does horrible things. But I think like Matt Damon is able to just he still like comes off in this like movie star kind of way throughout portions of the film where he's like a player and he is still very like a very attractive, very strapping. Matt Damon does none of that. Like everything about his character seems to be designed for you to be like, wow, this guy's just the biggest putz. And I think that's kind of he kind of won the movie for me just because of how far he was able to go into that and just like own that. Um, yeah, I wasn't. Adam Driver's a fantastic actor. I didn't think his performance. I thought that the character was very interestingly written, and we can get more into that when we get into spoilers. I thought he delivered a very good performance. There wasn't anything. It wasn't a very like talky performance. It wasn't like a very like flashy performance. I think he was a very understated, solid performance. Jodie Comer, I think, has the most interesting one because from the very beginning, I think the very interesting way the whole film is structured is that throughout the beginning, both of the male characters who kind of tell the first two chapters, whether you love them or hate them in each chapter, they still have clearly defined personalities. Whereas by virtue of the way things were in the 1300s when this film is set, Jodie Comer's character, the Lady Marguerite, isn't really given her own space. She isn't given her own personality at all during the first two chapters because as the men see her, she's basically property, as that's said later in the movie. So she has, I think, one of the most difficult tasks of being able to just play this like simpering like version of what these men wish she was, and then having to go and virtually kind of tie that to this character that she really is in the last chapter of the film without making them feel like different, when making them feel plausible, like she is the same character just seen through different lenses. And I think she did an amazing job of pulling that off. Yeah, I think Ben Affleck, I mean, everyone was great. I didn't think there was a weak performance in the lot, really.
Yeah, no, Ben Affleck. I think he portrayed that role really well.
Yeah.
Especially how the characters looked. I mean, that was pretty cool. I think the makeup design team did a really great job.
Yeah.
Picking him there. But yeah, I definitely do agree with you. With Jodie Comer's character, I think, especially with kind of how the things work. How she was like, how the women were like treated back then. I feel like it was cool to. I think it was important to have that perspective because her own chapter, because we got to learn so much more about her character and kind of see what she's all about and also what she has to go through on a daily basis. I feel like I learned a lot more about Matt Damon's character through her own character as well. And I feel like that was something that was more intriguing with Jodie Comer's character. To add on to Matt,
wait, sorry. While we're talking about acting, just real quick shout out, I have to say. I believe his name is Alex Lothar, Lautner, or Alex Lothar, or something like that, who plays the king. He's a great actor. I love him in other stuff, but just what he was doing with this king in this movie, I really enjoyed that. Just a very bit part, nothing complicated happening. It was a very surface level performance, but just really enjoyed every time I saw the king on screen.
the King's always supposed to be engaging and stuff. But yeah, I definitely do remember seeing the King a lot. I think it was interesting how they kind of used him as well. I think they kind of had him almost not, I want to say puppet, but like it kind of had like the King's roles through Ben Affleck's character, which I believe they were related in the film. So I thought that was interesting how the King kind of had I wouldn't say no power, but like you kind of didn't know much about the King, but he was kind of just there, but I still
puppet is a very good way of putting it, I think. Yeah, he was like the puppet of his court, and I think
exactly
I loved his thing he was doing. He's living in a totally different world than these men and this woman, like where they're literally life and death, and she's gonna get burned at the stake if she doesn't, if her husband doesn't win, and he's just like giggling in his chair because like this is all very fun for him on like this normal day, and I enjoyed that kind of dichotomy there.
Question me
Um,
if I'm wrong though, but I felt like he was a lot younger than like all the other characters.
oh yeah,
I,
I think he's a kid. I
I
think he was like a child king, I think was the
so
idea.
like I think the youth in him too just kind of shows
Yeah.
like how like even though he's this king like he's
Mhm.
young and like I think it really showed that to like all these like fighting and all this
Yeah.
murder and like misogyny, it's just all a little game to him. So I feel like
Yeah.
to Ben Affleck, I feel like he kind of almost manipulates him in a way. So I feel like
Mhm.
that was really interesting how the king's role was kind of in
Yeah.
this film, and I thought that was interesting. I also like how like the rival that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck had. First of all, I think number one why it was so interesting in that film was obviously because of Matt Damon's relentless portrayal of the role, and like his dedication. But I feel like number one, I think what was so interesting is that you have Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. They've always been like and I think to this day they're still like best friends. I think I remember one time Ben Affleck went so far as to like wearing this like humongous suit to sneak him in I think a Jimmy Kimmel interview, which I don't even know if
Yeah.
Jimmy Kimmel and Matt Damon really hate each other. I just think they do that for show, but I'm not sure. But to that point, though, I think it was interesting to see kind of how they're kind of at odds this movie, and I thought that was so interesting to have to put them against each other because historically
Mhm.
these guys are like some of the best friends. So I definitely think that was very interesting, very intriguing as well to see Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, at each other's heads really, and I feel like that was kind
Yeah.
of a storyline in this film that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not sure like what's even more interesting about it. I'm not sure if it's like scheduling conflicts that led to this being the case, but that it's not even like they're directly at odds with each other. Like it's not like Ben Affleck plays Jacques Legris. It's that he's like once removed like at odds with him. He's like they're at odds kind of adjacent. And I think that's even more of an interesting dynamic than if it had just been like, Matt Damon, De Carouge, and Ben Affleck, Legree, and they were just like directly at odds with each other. I think it's more interesting. Also, I think Ben Affleck would just have been more of a creepy presence as Legree. I think definitely Adam Driver was the correct casting because he had to be this like heartthrob before he shows his true colors.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was definitely an interesting point. To add on one more final thing, I want to add to Adam Driver's character. I kind of like how he portrayed it. I know it definitely wasn't maybe like as good as per se Marriage Story, but it's still role. I loved his role and I liked him as because of how he was able to interact with all the characters and how he kind of just portrayed himself. Like he knew he wasn't like this perfect person. He knew he wasn't anything like that. He was just kind of like portraying himself as like someone who's doing what he's told and doing what his honor
Mhm.
is. And I feel like just that portrayal of him, kind of being, I would say, like a good soldier almost, like the manipulation he had and like the interesting thing. And there's a lot I want to get into Ben Affleck's character, but the way Adam Driver portrayed himself and like just kind of stuck to his core in a way, I thought that was interesting, just kind of how he portrayed himself as the character. And he had a good personality too. And I liked how, that whole accuracy and everything like that. So we got the characters and we got the style of the film. I want to say, what were your thoughts really on the setting and the background, and also kind of shooting it in the, I think, what was it, like a cloudy type weather almost.
They shot it, I believe, in Ireland. I think they, to the best of my knowledge, they were just going to start shooting in March of 2020, and then they had to obviously stop for a while, and they went back and did it, I think, in late like September 2020. I can't remember exactly. It was like basically right when we all shut down, and then they had to go back and shoot it again, obviously. Um, but I think the setting is interesting, right? And this is something I've noticed. First of all, I think the rainy weather, the kind of very Irish weather is very it works for the film. It makes it feel gritty, it makes it feel grimy. This doesn't feel like a glorious or a fun medieval kingdom. This isn't, a Disney princess. I think that's very intentional. That this
Mm-hmm.
feels, it's not even like Gladiator. Gladiator still looks really
Mm-hmm.
flipping cool, um, and this is not that. This feels gross. It feels grimy when Jean de Carouge goes to this fancy party to go tell off Ben Affleck. Like it's still muddy and gross and dirty and like everything just looks horrible. Like I would not want to spend one day in this world, but that helps to make it feel so grounded and so real. There is an interesting thing that this is just a small detail, but it's something I've noticed in a lot of these films. when they try to go super realistic and go shoot in like actual castles, it often makes it feel less realistic to me because you're looking at these castles that are clearly the ruins of castles from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and you're expecting these people to live in these castles and be like actually living in them. And it's almost like if you shot something in a burnt out husk of an apartment building. And I'm kind of like that kind of for me takes away from the feeling of realism, because it just makes me feel like, well, okay, these are ruins. These aren't real castles. That's not what these castles looked like back when people were actually living in them. They looked grand. They looked glorious. And I recently watched Gladiator for the first time. And I noticed a very striking difference. I think it's because they used a lot of CGI. It was the early 2000s, and CGI it wasn't hated as it is today. It wasn't like looked at as like a hack. It was still a cool new thing. But for me, that choice to use CGI in Gladiator actually worked better for the visual aesthetic of the film because it looked awesome. It looked like ancient Romans where you want to be. But that being said, this is a very different movie. So it could also be that I'm totally wrong. And if these castles did look cool, we would want to spend time in them. And you don't want that. You don't want people to feel that way when they're watching this movie.
I really thought it was kind of almost like a symbolism too, just kind of like how it was dark and gritty and everything like that. Because this is not like some heartwarming story. No, this is about like knights and misogyny and like these characters who I think are flawed. I mean, as much as they want to perceive themselves as like these knights and noble, when we think of knights and we think of these kings and queens, we think of them as noble, people look up to them. But think of this film, it kind of just shows them like in a like a darker light, and you kind of get to see more about these characters. So the way that they shot them in this cloudy weather, I think it was good because it kind of just shows like the flaws and also like the sad things and negativities that happen in the kingdom. So I think that was definitely something interesting. Kind of what I wanted to compare it to almost was like Gladiator's a good comparison because also Ridley Scott directed that. But also I think the only other film like I've seen that was like in this sort of teal was Hamlet. I feel like Hamlet is a very interesting storyline because it was also shot relatively the same. It was shot, I believe, maybe in France, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but it was shot. But I think the difference with Hamlet and this one was how it was shot in the cloudy weather, whereas this one was shot like in the wind. I would say like sunny weather and everything like that. So I think that's really interesting, just like the weather too. I feel like that was a huge difference to like kind of have the disparities with the film. And I feel like this film, in a way, kind of brought out the characters a little bit more because you could feel for them, and like there wasn't like nothing glorious to look at. I mean, the weather's terrible, so you want to just look at the characters and see what that is. So I definitely think the weather and like the choice of scenery as well really made this character stand out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I think like I said, it felt Game of Thrones, very Game of Thrones style, in like a less grand version of like Winterfell or something, like a very like it kind of achieved the same effect where it kind of sucks. You don't really think you'd want to spend much time there.
Yeah.
But it works for the story.
For sure. Definitely. I definitely agree with that. And I guess we can get into like the actual before we get into like specifics of the story, why don't we talk about the last duel and like kind of how that whole process handled. I think that
the duel itself, are you talking about?
The duel itself, yes.
Yeah.
So I think the duel itself, I feel like was really interesting how they really how they kind of made it how they kind of like portrayed it in this film. I thought it was interesting how they first like initially showed it off and kind of how they described it and like how this anticipation built up. I thought for me, I mean, I could be terribly, well, this is my opinion on it. I honestly felt like really, really tense, like when it was going on, like I was on the edge of my seat. That was a huge battle. And, I like how and the movie did a really great job of just pitting Matt Damon versus Adam Driver. And I felt every bit of it. And I think it didn't disappoint. I think it was awesome. And I'll be honest with you, I could not tell who was going to win that fight. And edge of my seat, that was well shot as well. Just the way they shot it with like two actors kind of going at each other's heads and like the way that they were hitting every time. And like, that was well executed as well, especially like the intercutting as well. Thought that was beautifully well done as well. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just watching that, the only thing I was thinking was like, damn, Ridley can direct action sequences. He is really good at that. It was that sequence was just, like you said, edge of my seat, which usually is like a metaphor. It's usually just a saying. No, like literally, I think I was on the edge of my seat here. Like heart rate raised. Like I just think it was a really good action sequence. There's something I want to talk about, something that they do. So by the time the duel happens, the way you feel about different characters has really shifted. But I want, we'll wait until we do a spoiler warning for that.
For sure.
But yeah, overall, great duel. Great duel.
Great tool. All right. Anything we want to add up to the viewers who haven't seen this? Do you want to add anything before you for them, Sam?
Go watch it, please, guys. It's not making very much money. Go watch it.
Yeah, I was very surprised by that. And also, if you guys,
Yeah.
again, this is the portion. We're about to head to the spoiler review. If you guys have not seen this film yet, please, again, I recommend you watch it. This is Ridley Scott. This is one of his more, I would say, one of his more better works. I think that was really good works. However, if you guys do watch it, I do want to put a warning in it. It is rated R, and that's also because of there are some scenes that are uncomfortable, that may be uncomfortable. Sam straight up said they were rape scenes. Yes, there are going to be scenes like that in the film. So again, if you watch the movie, just make sure proceed with caution. So yeah, that's all I got to say. But yeah, go watch this film, but just proceed with caution.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, most definitely. On a spoilers.
All right. Let me just pause.
Cool.
All right, guys. So if you have made it to this far, you have seen the film, or you don't want to see the film and you want to just hear our take on it, and maybe you might see it because of I guess what happens. But again, if you have, again, this is a spoilers. We're gonna get into spoilers. So if you we recommend that if you have seen this film and you want to hear our opinions on it, again, please proceed again with caution. Like I said. All right, so let's get into spoilers. So the first thing I want to say, and I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but I want to get into the style again. But I want to get into more specifics. First of all, I feel like this would have been a spoiler if I said it. The narrative incoherence. Now, it's not narrative incoherence like, let's say how well, it's not like Pulp Fiction, because that was kind of told in that was told in chapters, but like it was told like out of order. This one was told in chapters too, but it was more in order. But I would say it was shot in narrative incoherence because you open the scene with the duel happening, and then you kind of have that. I feel like that was interesting because people got to see like, oh yeah, the duel's actually happening. Like they're not going to lead up to it. I feel like that was more interesting because it's kind of like how we got there, instead of people like waiting, oh, when's this duel going to happen? When's this duel going to happen? It's called Last Duel. No, they showed it to you right in the beginning, and then they kind of backtrack it. So I feel like it allows people to kind of get like kind of see, okay, this is what it's going to look like, but then they kind of realize. I feel like it's more engaging, and I feel like more people were more intrigued with the duel. What do you think about the idea of narrative incoherence, or did you consider narrative incoherence?
Well, so I think so to me, the film is basically structured as 3 short films, right? It's 3 short films that each kind of play into one another, and each one it's almost like kind of episodes of a show, really, where they play together. The opening teaser, I think it's an interesting way to open it. It's really the only way to open the movie. What is interesting is they mess with your expectations, because personally, I don't think the duel is the point of the movie at all. And not to jump ahead, but like the big thing, I think, the biggest like writing trick they do in the movie is that by the time the duel happens, at least if you're like me, you do not care what happens to the 2 men. You don't really care who wins. The reason you care who wins the duel is because of what's going to happen to Jodie Comer's character if Jacques Legree wins the duel. And I think that is what's very effective about it. So the end of the duel, it isn't like, I didn't feel like it was like like epic Ridley Scott duel. It's very tensely directed. It looks visually cool. If you just took that out, put just that clip online, it would be a tense, like awesome action scene.
Exactly.
But it doesn't feel like that when it comes around, when it actually happens, because it feels like this horrible, like dread in the pit of your stomach. Like, oh my gosh, Adam Driver is going to win this, and then she's going to get burned at the stake for being raped. And it's just this like horrific, like, that's what makes the scene so stressful. It's not just that it's an awesome, tense action scene. It's the fact that like this woman's life hangs in the balance of these 2 men and their egos. And I think what they do that's interesting about adding the teaser at the beginning is that it makes you assume that it's going to be this epic fight scene, this epic duel that it leads up to. And I think one issue they did in the marketing was that they spoiled. It's really hard to spoil this movie because they effectively spoiled the ending the reveal that she's going to get burned at the stake, which is basically a Dark Night of the Soul reveal. It like happens at the like break into 2 at the end of the second act. Break into 3 at the end of the second act of the film. And it's really like an emotionally gut punch moment. Like in my theater, people were like, shocked, but it's kind of spoiled in the trailer. And I think if it hadn't been spoiled that she's going to die if her husband loses this duel, if it hadn't been spoiled, then that would have made the beginning feel way cooler. But going into it knowing that, okay, if her husband dies here, she's going to die, that made that opening sequence feel a little bit more tense. But I think if you just watch the movie, if you don't know anything about it, and you just watch the movie as a movie, I think the opening teaser works very well to kind of get you like, oh, this is going to be an epic gladiator type movie. And then it immediately pushes you back and there's nothing more. And the next scene is like a bunch of people getting their heads cut off, a bunch of like innocent women getting their heads chopped off or like their throats slit. And it's this like, this is going to be gladiator. No, it's not. This is going to be horrific. And I think it's a very interesting shift they make there.
I love what you said, Sam, about the whole kind of like how this duel is not about Matt Damon versus Driver, even though I feel like that's how they kind of marketed it. Oh, Adam Driver versus Matt Damon. It's going to be like that. I think it was more meaningful when you kind of got to it. And luckily for me, I did see the trailer, but I didn't really pay attention that much. What I took away from the trailer, I completely thankfully I forgot about that part about, oh yeah, no, she's gonna get burned. I thought I just knew what I took away was someone raped Jodie Comer and Matt Damon's gonna fight. Adam Driver raped Jodie Comer and Matt Damon's gonna fight Adam Driver for it. I'm like, okay, I'm ready for Matt Damon. So I guess I really got to engage with that experience. I definitely agree with you that like the teaser for me was great because again I didn't know about that. I'm like, oh, they're gonna fight for some reason. But that was an interesting talking point about how Jodie Comer is going to get raped because she just accused herself, and there are multiple reasons why this is like so.
She's going to get killed. You mean, right?
Exactly. She's going to get she already got raped. My bad. All over the place right now. It's all good. Anyways, she was going to get killed for just talking her mind, and I feel like it's an interesting talking point about how the gender roles were back in the day in the 1300s, I believe it was. So very interesting kind of how they kind of shaped the duel and how they portrayed that duel. Again, edge of your seat because we were so worried about Jodie Comer's character, and essentially we had to root for Matt Damon's character. And to get onto that now, we can get into the relationships. I think the first chapter was so interesting because Matt Damon kind of portrayed himself as like, again, he is like not flaw. He has like so many flaws and he's not the greatest person. But really, I think in the first chapter, I really thought, they portrayed Matt Damon as like someone who almost can do no wrong, almost like they portrayed him in a way where like he's like this upright, great character. I'm like, I didn't see nothing wrong with him. But I feel like in the Jodie Comer's story, or I think her name was Marguerite de Cruz. We learned so much more about Matt Damon's character, and we learned that he's kind of like this abusive guy and a terrible husband in a way, just having sex with her not because he loves her, but because he wants another child. But I think,
he wants Adam Driver to not be the last person who had sex with her.
Oh, that's another thing.
That was just brutal moment.
Brutal. But that was, and they didn't even show that. So thankfully for that. But I do want to point out, and I feel like people kind of forget this, and I think it's important to his character, and maybe it's not, but I thought it was important, and that's something I took away. Matt Damon lost his in the movie, or John de Cruz lost his son and his wife. So in a way, I can almost. It's not good what he was doing, but you kind of like, well, he lost his wife and he lost his child. So in a way, he was desperate and he tried to portray himself in like this aggressive way because he lost so much and he's trying to, do better almost in a way and kind of built himself up after he's lost so much. And there was a play going on, which I think there's a play going on right now still, but still, I thought that was an interesting point into his thing. But really, what Matt Damon's character, what did you think so far from his first, his chapter before we get into like Adam Driver or Jodie Comer's part?
So what's interesting is in all three of these sequences, the moments that I think even during Matt Damon's sequence, he was a dweeb, first of all. During he was like, you kind of were like, okay, enough, man. Like, you're not that slighted. You have several castles and a very attractive wife who's basically your property. Like, calm down, you're fine. And then and even there's a sequence that's played in Matt Damon's chapter, and then again in Marguerite's chapter, that is the sequence where she tells him that Adam Driver raped her. And that sequence, even in Matt Damon's chapter, is like he's not handling it well. And then obviously in Marguerite's chapter, he's really he like grabs her by the throat and then forces her to have sex with him. Like it is obvious, but even in his own eyes, he's handling the situation very poorly by today's standards and in a horrible way. And I think that's reflected even more in the rape scene. The first rape scene, which occurs during Jacques Legree's Adam Driver's chapter, which, sorry to jump ahead, but in Jacques Legree's chapter, that rape scene is still brutal. It still feels like clearly this is not consensual. Clearly this is not okay what's happening. And then you see what actually happened. And I was shocked by that. I didn't necessarily think they were going to show it again, because I already thought that the first rape scene was horrific enough. And like, we didn't need another one to be like, oh yeah, he raped her. Like, he obviously raped her by the first one, but then to see the second rape scene, that's like so much worse and much more obvious that, and it's just, I think those are the interesting pieces where you don't like them already. And that shows you inside their mind, their world works so differently, where they think even when they're portraying themselves positively, they're still doing horrible things, and they think that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And like, it's so different, again, I feel like I think the gender roles were a huge part into this film, like just how the genders work. Cause like, I feel like in this film, the men kind of were like dominated, the men, whatever the men said was right. And the women almost were like, again, like property, like second class citizens, like their opinions didn't matter. And I feel like, because of that, it kind of allowed them in this way to kind of overpower them in a way. And like, it's almost like, Adam Driver didn't feel no wrong into what he was doing, because her opinion doesn't matter. It's almost like they didn't treat her as like their own person or whatever. So I definitely thought that was just kind of it was a very interesting talking point in this film. But did you think of anything else, like in these gender roles, kind of how men almost use women as objects, toxic masculinity?
I mean, look, we're two dudes talking about this. Like, there's obviously, we only have one perspective on it. But I think like, it's just the way there's one sequence where Adam Driver's character, he clearly thinks throughout this entire film that he did not rape her. He believes that to the bitter end.
Exactly.
When Matt Damon is giving him a chance to save his life by admitting the fault, and he's like, we'll take the knife through the face, because he genuinely believes he did not rape her. And I think that is the moment, because you see an early moment, and I really think Ridley Scott and Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and oh gosh, this is not good, Nicole, I don't know her last name. You know her last name? The other writer on this project?
Not sure. I think
gosh.
I thought it was
so bad that we can't remember the one woman's name. But I think all of them are clearly doing something. They're trying to reflect it on the current state of American masculinity and what men are told about themselves that leads them to behave in such a way, and the way the kind of things that are reinforced throughout our lives. Because there's a scene towards the beginning where Adam Driver is at like a sex party with Ben Affleck, and they are like, he's like chasing this girl around a table, and then he like taps her and has sex with her, and she's giggling and laughing and saying no, but like giggling, and it's like not okay, but like it's not really rape. Like, it's, she wants it pretty obviously, and it is, but it shows that is what he expects. So then the exact same kind of situation happens when he goes to see Marguerite and ends up raping her. The exact same situation, except she's genuinely screaming and saying no, and saying, stop, don't do this. But I think they're trying to draw a connection between the way men are enabled to act, and the way that then reflects what they see, and what they do in a vacuum then reflects what they do in the real world. And I think it was a very kind of clever way of doing that without putting too much of a button on it. And I think that is, there's so many very obvious, very kind of trite, like comparisons to masculinity being made in TV shows and movies. And I think this did it particularly well, where it took this very clearly, thus the audience had to put these pieces together. The filmmakers gave us all the pieces, but we had to put the puzzle together.
Yeah, and also to add on, that it was, I think, no, Nicole Holenfenster, I believe her name is. So that was the other writer. It was her, Ben Affleck, and Matt Damon. Just to go on to your point, but yeah, I definitely agree with what you said about kind of how it was so interesting and kind of how these topics are presented to this day. But it was also kind of heartbreaking and like disappointing how these factors were a thing back in the day. And
Mhm.
well, it was obviously disheartening how that whole process happened. And I thought that was just a horrific and really painful scene to watch. Just both of the. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I didn't see any of those scenes. I mean, it was too much for me.
Mm.
I left the theater. I was just
Oh
outside.
yeah.
I'm like, nope, nope, this is too much for me.
Mhm.
So yeah, I definitely thought I didn't like kind of just the brutalness of that scene. It was terrible. And I think Jodie Comer, I think she did a really great job again with her
Mhm.
performance. I really loved, with her character as well, kind of how we learned so much more about Matt Damon's character. Because when we watch, John De La Cruz, we learn, he's this, he's a great. I mean, from his chapter, he kind of was perceived as like a great guy, a knight. He does what he has to do.
Yeah.
A soldier almost, but knight, soldier, whatever, same thing. But
Mhm.
we learned so much about him. But even then, like when she told him about him getting raped, you kind of see the right then and there, like, hey, he's kind of slowly abusive. And then we kind of learn later in the film
Mhm.
kind of how he's like not this great husband and he's like kind of abusive towards her and like,
Mhm.
he kind of just uses her like as property,
Yeah.
not even like as a wife almost. And
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting that we got to learn more about Matt Damon's character than we did with in his own chapter. I felt like that was
Mhm.
so interesting, unique story dynamic. And yeah.
Yeah. I do think the one place the movie kind of feels light is the place, and I want to be very careful how I put this. I think Jodie Comer's character, because she's treated as like background, like the furniture during the first two chapters. That means that we really don't know her. I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this episode talking about not Ben Affleck, sorry, Adam Driver's character and Matt Damon's characters, and not a lot about Jodie Comer. And I feel like that's because she's simply less developed than the other characters because we only get her for 45 minutes at the end, the
Mm,
first two chapters. And I think it's effective in some ways where you see that she seems in the first two chapters like she's just in love with in the first chapter it seems like she's in love with Matt Damon and hates Jacques Legree, and in the second chapter it seems like, oh, she like doesn't like Matt Damon, he's a dweeb, and like so she's in love, she like wants
mm,
to get Adam Driver. But and then in the third chapter you kind of see what she's really about. But I think that kind of left the last when you start to see her chapter, it feels very jarring to me, this shift. And it felt like they took her to a very modern place that I think was not necessary. It felt like they needed her to make a splash,
mm,
and they needed her character to be big and be like they obviously they wouldn't want to have their female character as like weak. But I
mm,
think what they do is they go too far in the other direction and make her too modern. And there were moments towards the end of the second act where I just simply wasn't buying that in this world she would say things like, I have to speak my truth, I have to say this. I understand this happened, I understand these sequence of events happened, it's based on true events. I have a hard time believing that she would say a lot of the dialogue that she says in this movie. And that's the moment where it started to feel like, okay, Hollywood is doing a Me Too movie, and this is a Me Too movie, and it became very like obvious the parallels they're trying to draw. And so like earlier bits that I was talking about, like the moment where he's chasing the girl, like Adam Driver's chasing the girl around the table and he chases Marguerite around the table, that worked very well, I thought, because it's very like it felt subtle enough that we have to put the pieces together.
mm.
Towards the end of the second act, when Marguerite is like now on the warpath, she's going to go and speak her truth. That's when it started to feel like the movie was trying to tell us something. And I
Mm.
think it's because they didn't give Marguerite's character enough development,
Yeah.
because they were making a point of giving her a little development. But I still think that it kind of sacrificed her character, which is difficult for a movie like this, which is about how women are sidelined by men.
Mm.
They kind of sidelined her character a little bit, and I think that was kind of the only tough part I had with the film.
I definitely would agree. Kind of, I think the disappointing thing was kind of how we didn't know much about her because even with Matt Damon and Adam Driver's character, we knew a lot about their characters, and we knew even a bit about Ben Affleck's character Pierre, but we didn't know too much about her. And I felt like it was. I mean, I liked the 45 minutes we had with her, but I definitely was disappointed that we didn't get to see much about her, and we didn't get to see her whole story and process. And like it's a shame that we only got to towards the end to see kind of what she was all about and like what
Yeah.
her opinion is. I mean, she was the one who was raped, and I think we should have seen more of her time. And
Mhm.
I think that's something there should have been more balance. And it's unfortunate that we didn't get to see much of Marguerite slash Jodie Comer's character enough. And
Yeah.
because of that underdevelopment, it was harder to kind of put the pieces together. But yeah,
Yeah. Most definitely.
I still love Jodie Comer's character, and
Yeah.
me a nomination, hopefully a nomination. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
I don't know how
maybe.
this film's gonna do it. Just because it like I think the budget was something like $100 million, and it's made like as of today, which is the 23rd or something, 24th
Yeah.
of October. It's made like $10 million or like $12 million. It's just very sad that how poor this movie's doing. And like I know this isn't exactly original content; it's based on something else.
Yeah,
But
it's
like
based off a novel, I believe.
it's based on I think it's based off a book that's based on a true story.
Yes.
And so I think that is where I just get like it, but it's still more original than say like Shang-Chi. And I not that there's anything wrong with Marvel. I love Marvel. I'm not a Scorsese type of person who says they're a carnival ride. I think it's a movie. It's very obviously a movie, but like I do like when people take these big original swings, and it just seems like it really isn't happening as much. And when every time a movie like this fails, it is tragic to me because it just means that that's one more nail in the coffin of original films. And if Ridley Scott can't make an effective movie, it was marketed very poorly. Let's be honest. The market, I don't know who
Yeah.
marketed it. It was marketed very badly. But yeah, if they can't make money off of Ridley Scott, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Adam Driver, Jodie Comer movie, it's sad day for original movies.
It's sad, and I think especially over at my theater, which I worked at, not many people were going to go see this movie. It got well reviews. Maybe that was a thing. It was kind of conflicting as well, but maybe I guess not many people were interested. I mean, when you have a movie like Dune coming out, and you have a movie like when you have a movie like Shang-Chi still playing, or Venom. You have these big budget franchises. It's hard to compete with original stories. And hopefully on streaming it'll be interesting. And I believe it is technically 20th Century Fox, so it might be going on Hulu or Disney Plus, probably on Disney Plus.
It won't go on Disney Plus.
No, won't go on Disney Plus. My bad. It's gonna go on Hulu. Probably
yeah,
Hulu.
it'll probably be Hulu. They might try to stick it on VOD first.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Try to recoup some of their losses, but yeah, I don't know. Again, they marketed it like in LA. Every single billboard and ad and everything is for a TV show or film. And even then, like I saw it on a couple of bus benches, but like nothing compared to any other films. Yeah, and I think it's tough. It's just like it makes it even more painful to me that it opened across next to Halloween Kills.
Yeah.
And Halloween Kills did so well, and that movie is not good at all. And it lost so tragically to Halloween Kills, and that's just like, oh, knives to my heart.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate, and it's especially Ridley Scott, who's a great director and beloved by so many people. But it's just harder to connect with the audience too. It's our movie. I mean, our movies. Well, Halloween Kills, our movie, and still it did so well. I mean, it's just all about the franchise films. Go ahead.
I do wonder, not to bring politics into it, but I do think this movie was definitely, like everything I saw in the reviews said this is the Me Too kind of war epic movie. And I do think when you ascribe a movement like Me Too to something, it alienates half of your audience right there. Not because if they actually got to understand Me Too, they would not agree with it, but because Me Too has become it's a blanket term that has been used to everything about that is bad. So I think a lot of people probably saw it's Hollywood's Me Too movie and said, oh no, liberal woke movie, I'm not going to go see that. And I think that because young men are usually a big part of the audience for these kind of epics, these kind of sprawling gladiator epics, like young men. And a lot of these young men probably are not the key audience who want to see a Me Too movie.
Yeah.
So I think that could have been another thing that movie had going against it, and maybe why they didn't try marketing it very hard. Maybe they were like, all of these great people want to make this movie, but clearly it's not going to make money. So we're not
Yeah.
even going to try to waste more money on marketing it.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess maybe they knew in a way that it wasn't going to be as great. I mean, they released a trailer kind of late. I knew about this movie I think 2 years ago though, but they kind of released a trailer late. I do think the pandemic also kind of has a huge factor into this.
Oh, of
It's not.
course.
I think that was a huge factor too, and I think I mean I think there's a lot of movies, and to your point about how it kind of got political, I honestly didn't see a lot of that. Well, especially with the marketing, I didn't see much about that. But yeah, I think that they could have marketed it better. And when you're going up against these, I think it's really just the franchise films. They're kind of taking over in a way, and it's
Yeah.
just harder to get into it. And but my GM actually told me that it's adults aren't going to go to the movies now, and then I think it's
Yeah.
harder for them to kind of go see it. And I feel like this movie probably would have done better on a streamer because I don't think people are going to go spend, $15 to watch an independent film when they can watch, a big epic film. So I feel like
Yeah.
that is a factor as well. I think there's a lot of factors into this. Now, to
Yeah.
kind of interesting point, and this is kind of talking in real time. What's interesting though is, and there might be another reason why I think this movie may not have as good, but kind of relevant. With the French Dispatch came out, and it's doing pretty well, at least in my theater, it's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
So I do think
I
that
just
there's
saw it on Thursday. Yeah.
there's hope for
Packed theater.
French Dispatch. I think it's that. And I want to ask you this, and maybe you don't know, but you do work for the company. But do you think maybe it's different? I'm not sure how it is, but to your personal thing, whatever knowledge but do you think also was a factor of kind of how there is this other movie by the same director, and I assume the same company, that probably has a more relevant, like I want to say more relevant, but a more I would say more dazzling and more aspiring cast and a more, I guess, more relevant or
Yeah.
more cohesive topic. Which is, I guess, House of Gucci again. They have like a lot of Academy Award nominee stars in it, and they have like a
Yeah.
more relevant or more common topic. Do you also think that was a factor at all into like the marketing and also kind of why maybe this movie thing? I mean, I think
So I
kind of
think
is.
it's so Scott Free is the production company for both of those films, but
Yeah.
obviously the production company is not in charge of the marketing. So the marketing is done by the studio, and there are different studios. So this was 20th Century Pictures, and the House of Gucci is, I believe, MGM.
Okay.
Which I was surprised to see because I didn't know we made films with them, but they yeah, so I don't really think 20th Century would have been like, oh, we have this other Ridley movie coming out, we're gonna try to bury The Last Duel. That wouldn't make sense to me. They would have wanted to market it again because they have no invested interest in House of Gucci succeeding. But I think definitely we'll start to see that in January, February, as the Academy Awards start to come around. I think I don't know that has been a factor here because they're very different movies. They're very different
Yeah.
audiences. Like
Yes.
The Last Duel is like more in the Gladiator vein, or like Exodus Gods and Kings, whereas House of Gucci is more in the like all the money in the world, Thelma and Louise kind of vibe.
Yes. Yes.
And I think so. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're competing against each other right now, but I think definitely in January, February, we're going to start to see that where I think no one will mention The Last Duel. This is just my prediction. Nobody will be mentioning The Last Duel in January, February when it comes to Oscar predictions. I think that will go wholeheartedly to House of Gucci, unless House of Gucci sucks, which it probably won't. But if it does, then maybe people will talk about Last Duel. But if you're looking for a Best Director Oscar nomination, any of the acting noms, I think that'll all go to the House of Gucci people, just because that's going to be, like you said, it's a more popular topic. It's Lady Gaga. It's like a much more, they're clearly doing an awards push for this, where it's pretty clear they didn't know what this was in The Last Duel. They didn't know what they had and how to tell people to see it.
To go on to your point about marketing, I think another thing that kind of hurt this movie a little bit is also the Disney Fox major. Disney's kind of also put out this like kind of loss, like we don't know what to do with this. We don't really know how to market. And because Free Guy, although that was kind of another thing, Free Guy is a PG-13 movie with also Jodie Comer, by the way. Interesting film. If you haven't seen that, also I recommend watch that, Jodie Comer. But anyways, I think it's interesting because Disney doesn't really do R-rated movies, so I felt like they kind of were put in like a difficult perspective. So I think there are a multitude of reasons why the marketing wasn't great because Disney kind of didn't know what to do. It's an R-rated movie.
That
They
could very
haven't
well be,
really
yeah.
there. So I think there's a lot of factors into why, and I do think the pandemic is in there. Now I think now there are a lot of multitude of reasons why I don't think this movie wasn't as, I guess, financially successful as we wanted to, but I think it was still really good. But I like how we kind of got into like that whole thing. So now
Yeah.
to go back into the plot, I wanted to
Yeah.
say, um so we addressed Jodie Comer. I think she was really great. What I wanted to really get into was I wanted to get into, 1 second.
Yeah.
We're trying.
Cool.
So now that Jodie Comer, and we kind of guessed into her, and hopefully, I hope the best for her. She did again a really good job. I think she was also, I think she was nominated for a couple Emmys too with her. I think it was Killing Eve, the show with Sandra. So she has that experience before. But I think this is Jodie. But now
I
I really
keep
want to
forgetting that she was on Killing Eve. Sorry,
Yeah.
I keep forgetting that she was Villanelle. Oh, that's such a good show.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, it's all good, man. Anyways, back into Matt Damon and Adam Driver's characters. I really want to talk about them, and now I can really get into specifics as to why I love Adam Driver's character so much. So Adam Driver, he I believe was a Marine, I believe, and now he's kind of transitioned
Huh.
into like an actor. So that's pretty interesting. But I love him. I liked his role in Kylo Ren. I thought it was interesting. He obviously had two other performances preceding this one, which I think was in Black Klansman and Marriage Story, both each receiving an Oscar nomination for both performances. So I had high expectations into him, and I do liked his performance. I kind of liked it again because of his personality and kind of how he portrayed himself, and also how he kind of stick to his core and how he stick to the character's core, but also his personality and kind of the way he presented himself. I thought that was interesting how he did that, and yeah, he played a good, I would say, villain-esque character, and kind of just the transition he had. I thought that was great. And another thing I want to touch on is Ben Affleck and Adam Driver's relationship in this movie. I think it was also interesting. We know Matt Damon's a soldier character, and we know, or not a soldier, he's a knight, and he's trying to be noble and everything. And we kind of see that a little bit in the first two chapters when we kind of slowly see his character deteriorate. What I thought what was interesting was kind of how Adam Driver in Matt Damon's chapter describes him as a friend. Like, we're friends, we do everything together. And what's interesting was how Jack West is the one who's saying, Jack West, by the way, Adam Driver's character, he's saying that we're friends in a Matt Damon chapter. And yeah, they're friends. And like, even though like Matt Damon is struggling to kind of struggle with that, or John De La Cruz is struggling with being friends with him, he still like owns up to it. And he even shows up to, like, I want to say his like birth of a child, something like that. He had a party. What was interesting to me was how in Adam Driver's portion, you kind of see that they're not actually friends, that Adam Driver does not actually like Matt Damon. And he's kind of like owning up more to Pierre, or Ben Affleck's character. I felt like that was so interesting how Jack West is saying that I'm friends with you, but when we see his perspective, he's not actually friends with him, and he actually doesn't like him. I thought that was very interesting, kind of how you see the two shifts of the relationship and how it was parallel. What do you really think about the relationship between the two of them?
I think in the trailers they definitely made it out to be like they are good. They were friends, and then Jacques did this terrible thing, and now they're not friends anymore. And I definitely didn't get that vibe. I think from the very beginning, I think Matt Damon's character seems to not like Jacques at all, and then definitely when we switched into Adam Driver's chapter, he definitely did not like Matt Damon, and so I think there was it felt like there's something about show don't tell in screenwriting, and that's like, I think they maybe could have benefited from that, but maybe there was a purpose. I'm sure there was a purpose. These guys are brilliant writers, so maybe there's a purpose behind it. They're all saying they're friends. Maybe it's something to do with like they're friends because they are supposed to be friends, but they never actually are. I do agree that Matt Damon seemed to have held Adam Driver in higher regard at the beginning of the film than Adam Driver did to him at the same time once his chapter rolls around. But I never got a warmth from them. I felt like every time they were on screen, with the exception of maybe one scene, it was a very transactional nature where they're friends, friends, air quotes, for those of you listening and not watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't love I thought their relationship probably could have been fleshed out a little bit more, but then again, it could have totally been very purposeful. to make it feel
Mm.
like they were just paying lip service to the fact that they are
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely really interesting, kind of how the whole thing about them friends. Especially with the fire scene, and also kind of how he even says that John De La Cruz saved his life, and he went and he kind of had that bold statement to kind of attack the army, and I thought that he would hold him to a high respect because he saved his life, but that was interesting. Just again their whole relationship, but I think one person I really want to get into now is I really think that this character was kind of, I want to say underappreciated, but I think he had a bigger presence than he realized, which is Matt Damon's, Ben Affleck's Pierre.
Yeah.
I feel like he was the main villain in this movie. I think
Hmm.
he had a really bigger presence in this film. I mean, if you look at it properly, he is the reason why Adam Driver is doing all these things and why he did what he did and like what he like. There's a lot of evidence in the movie. You see him kind of putting Matt Damon and forcing Adam Driver to be at odds with Matt Damon. He influences him in a way because
Hmm.
you kind of first see that Matt Damon does not like him to start off the movie. Like the first thing he says, Adam Driver's like, "We can't attack because Pierre said not to," and he's like, "I'm not. I don't care. I'm gonna do that." And he attacks, and they attack against Pierre's orders. And you can see when they were going up to him, when they were going up to, I think they were kissing him or kissing like his arm or
Yeah.
something, saying that we're gonna serve for you. You could see Matt Damon's hesitation. He doesn't want to go up to him. He's showing you right then and there. That's Ridley Scott showing you right then and there that he doesn't like him. You can see it that there's a rivalry between the two of them, and you don't really see much of that from Matt Damon's perspective, but you can see him through Ben Affleck's character, where you see him in, I think, Adam Driver's portion. You see him kind of hold Jacques to like this higher standard. You see him learning French. You kind of gas him up in a way, kind of see him. He's like this cooler guy. And I
Hmm.
feel like the reason why that their relationship deteriorated because Adam Driver thought that Ben Affleck's character liked him a lot more, and he felt like he was more respected by this noble person. And I felt like because of that, it allowed is the reason why Adam Driver shifted away from Matt Damon's character and why he kind of was like his almost a puppet in a way. He by telling him, "Hey, we need money. You need to pay for your war fees." Um, what do you think
Yeah.
overall about Ben Affleck's character?
So I think Ben Affleck's character is interesting. In a way, he's playing comic relief, I think, and then in a way, he's obviously playing. He's this, kind of a agent of chaos in the film too, where he kind of almost an expositional character or like a plot device character, where he something needs to happen, so he does something to make something happen. What I think is interesting is the emotional core of this film. There's a lot of time spent on treaties and dowries and lawsuits and things in this film. But I think what's interesting is, but when it actually comes down to it, it's the accusation of rape, right? I think up until that point, Ben Affleck plays a very pivotal role. I think he kind of stops playing this role once you realize this isn't actually a movie about knights and an honorable knight and a dishonorable knight. This is a movie about a woman who is raped by a man and a horrible husband who comes to get his honor back to fight this man. Um, and I think Ben Affleck's character was certainly important in the first part. I think he stopped. I would disagree with you a little bit as to his importance in the overall story. I definitely agree that he is important in the ways you've said. I just would disagree that those aspects of the film are actually what's important at the end of the film. I think those are actually kind of a red herring, that they spend a lot of time on them so that it feels so much more shocking when you actually get to the really human interactions you have towards the end that are the real nexus point of the story.
Yes.
Um, but no, Ben Affleck's character, I think he has a great performance. I loved him. I Now maybe this is just being gay, and this is something I think a lot of gay people do, but like automatically assume that any two guys who have a very close relationship in a film are going to turn out to be gay. So I definitely there were moments where I was like wondering if it was if there was like some secret gay subplot between Adam Driver and Ben Affleck, but no, I think that was just the thing gay people do. But other than that, I mean, I think yeah, his character was comic relief and definitely a good foil for both of the two male leads in the film.
Well, I definitely do think that kind of if you kind of misses the moment almost with Ben Affleck's character, I think what the reason why they had to go to the duel in the first place was because kind of how Ben Affleck was manipulating the courts and kind of how he manipulated the king in a way. Like they couldn't go to trial and just say, "Oh, he raped me." No, they had to go to a duel because of kind of how Matt Damon manipulated that way. And also, I want to say the rape and all that stuff happened because of the way he kind of manipulated those events. For example, you have Matt Damon who chose to even get married to Marguerite in the first place because he wanted to get rich. He married her because he wanted to get rich and pay off his debts. So in a way, he was forced to marry her because of that, and also because kind of also pinned Adam Driver and Matt Damon at odds each other, and also have that interest in other because of what he kind of framed them in a way, and like kind of disinfect their relationship in a way. And I felt like that was something that was an interesting point. And to add on, I definitely do think like towards the end you kind of have him influence it's towards the end he kind of takes a step back, but I definitely do think he manipulated the courts in a way to the point where they had to go to a last duel. And duels I think were not I think if duels were actually like not necessarily rare and thing. So
Yeah.
it was interesting how they framed that. To another point that I thought was interesting with the whole point of Adam Driver and I think Jodie Comer's character, they had that I think one interaction which I think forced him to have that. And also I think Jodie Comer kissed him straight up, and I thought that was a very interesting choice. Did you think that that was
Wait, did
intentional?
she kissed him?
I think because Matt Damon says give her a kiss.
Oh, right. Matt Damon tells her to kiss him. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that just showed it was like in Jacques Legree's storyline, to him, that was like his version of like why she was secretly into him. I think in her version, that was just more evidence of the fact that she really is a toy for these two men. And it was really her husband, that she is property of her husband, that she belongs to him. And that if he was like, hey, I want to give you, Jacques, I want to give you a night with my wife. Go have sex with her. She's yours. That it was nothing more than if he was like, do you want to go ride my horse? That I think that was just more evidence to like, she has no power in this relationship whatsoever. That's kind of how I read that moment. But yeah, I think it's definitely a very effective moment. This movie has a lot of moments that are like that, where they're very simple moments that have one, when looked at through one lens of Jean de Carouge's lens, they mean one thing, and then looked at later through Marguerite's lens or Jacques' lens, they mean something completely different. And they're kind of, every different chapter kind of twists these moments in very small, sometimes large, but sometimes very small, subtle ways to make them seem very different depending on who is witnessing them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. So that was good how they led up to framing those points, and I think those kind of moments were hit or miss. Now, question me if I'm wrong, but I kind of remember this moment. Do you remember when I think Marguerite went to Jacques' house and she said sorry for bothering you, and then I think they have sex or something, or he rapes? I don't remember. Do you remember anything like that was told in Jack West's story? I don't. I remember something where they met like alone in like this room. I remember something like.
So there was a scene with a tent. There was a scene in the tent at the party, where I don't know what Marguerite thought was happening there. It wasn't in her storyline, but in Jacques' storyline, that was the moment where they started flirting, and he realized that he liked her, and in his mind, she liked him back. Yeah. And then I think, excuse me, sorry. And I believe the next time they speak, I think they see each other a few other times, but I think the next time they speak, he comes to her house when she's alone, and him and his like manservant come, and he makes his manservant trick her into opening the door, and then he comes in, and they have a scene, and that leads to the rape, I believe.
Yeah, I thought maybe I might be forgetting. Maybe I jumped to something, but I do remember them having another interaction after that. I'm not sure what that meant, but I think they did. I'm not entirely sure. So kind of, I thought it was interesting how that was not in Marguerite's storyline as well. Kind of that interaction that they had about reading and the French.
Oh yes, I believe that's the tent scene. I believe that's the scene in the tent when they're at the party.
That was an interesting point. But
Yeah, and I think probably it wasn't in Marguerite's storyline because I mean, at least my read on it is that it didn't register with her. She was in
mm,
her mind, she was being polite in that scene. You know, she's like, this man is talking to me and flirting with me, so I'm going to be polite. Or maybe like she said, she found him handsome. Maybe she was like, you know, charmed by the fact that he was showing her interest, but it wasn't strong enough of an emotion in any direction to register with her moving forward and be important in her recounting of the story.
oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah, I definitely do agree with you on that point. I definitely didn't think about it like that. I'm like, that was interesting how they maybe it wasn't because like it wasn't important or to her. I was kind of like just like any other action, and it didn't have a big impact on her. So I thought it was interesting, how they showed it with Jack West's character because it was so important. She actually likes me. We have something in common. Matt Damon doesn't like you as much because he doesn't care about you and talk about you like the way I
Yeah.
do. But Jodie Comer's character is like, just a normal conversation. So interesting how kind of just shows, the perspectives in both of those characters. I think that was interesting. So now we get into like kind of the last duel and kind of how they kind of frame it in that way. Or leading up to that. I thought what was interesting for me, for the most part, when we got into like the actual like the events leading up to it, you get to learn more about again what the last duel is about. Jodie Comer, she got raped, and somehow because she was telling I was confused again. Maybe you might explain it better, but I think what happened was they brought it to court. They said they were going to duel about it, but somehow, I was confused about it. Could you explain why she was going to die if Matt Damon died?
So that was always part of the deal. I think that they just never told her that. So I think the law in France was that basically this idea that if you challenge someone by trial by combat, they are that is God deciding who won. So whoever won the duel is whoever was telling the truth. So in the case of this duel, if Jacques de whatever the hell his name is, if Adam Driver won the duel in the eyes of the French law at the time, that means he was telling the truth and Matt Damon was lying, and Adam Driver never had raped her. So then she had lied about a rape, which under French law would lead to her being burned at the stake. And I think that's kind of how that flow came together. But nobody told her that because, again, Matt Damon didn't really see this as being about her. He saw this as being about his pride and his honor. So he didn't really think it was pertinent or relevant, the fact that she might die in a very painful way if he loses this duel. So I think that's how and also it's like a screenwriting thing. It was a good twist. It's like a good all is lost bit. I think clearly there was some like moving things around for the sake of the story, I think.
All right, yeah, definitely. I think I might have missed that or the French law, but I definitely appreciate you giving insight on that because now it makes more sense. They didn't. I was aware that they didn't tell her about it, but like she was gonna die. Because it was like because that's how they thought God ruled the action. So I thought that was definitely. So now looking back at it, I'm like, that actually makes a lot of sense in that regard. And I kind of liked how they kind of interrogated in a way Adam Driver, and then they interrogated Matt Damon to like thinking, we're gonna do this, and how like the buildup of that. I thought that was interesting as well. So now we get into like the actual fight. Now I think first and foremost, like we said before, edge of our seats. I really was like so engaged because even though I didn't like Matt Damon's character, he had flaws and he was abusive and stuff. Adam Driver raped like her, like
yeah.
He was terrible. He was a terrible character, and also because he was and another thing that I had as well was, I mean, that's the number one point blank in the story, but also because he was a bad friend and he kind of in a way betrayed Matt Damon, and because he was kind of owned up to Pierre and so much when this guy saved your life, and yet you're gonna go up to the guy who he despises because of his questionable methods. So I thought
what's interesting. Sorry, no, you finish what you're saying.
I was just gonna say that like I was interesting because like he kind of got betrayed by Adam Driver because I think he took his father's property, something like that. He took like his father's property. So I think that there was a lot of storylines into that fight. But go on to what you were saying.
So I think what's interesting is in there's a very small beat, there's a very quick beat, but in the first scene of both of the men's chapter is the Battle of some river, and in Matt Damon's version, he saves Ben Affleck's life. Adam Driver's life, and Adam Driver is very thankful of that. In Jacques' version, we don't see the sequence where Matt Damon saved his life, because that did not, again, register as important to him. And there is a moment where he saves Matt Damon when Matt Damon falls in the river and he comes by and swings and kills the guy. So they both believe they're the hero of that story. What's very interesting about that. Sorry, just a small aside. But yes, I think that's what's so interesting about how the film is, about how the adding that moment where Jodie Comer realizes that she's going to be burned at the stake if Matt Damon loses the duel. Because I think everything the story has done up until that point is to tell us Matt Damon is a jerk and that we should not root for him. There's no reason to root for him. Oh, we don't really care. Either one of these men dying, fine. If a meteor hit both of them, they both died, also fine. So I think adding that moment where we're tying the outcome of Matt Damon to the outcome of Jodie Comer and her brutal death, that is, I think, a very important moment, because I think if we didn't have that moment, if that moment came earlier in the story, or if she always knew going in that this was a chance. Sorry, just
You're good, man. You're good.
Then I think we would not really care about what happened in the duel. But having that scene and then almost immediately going to the duel is such a powerful moment. We realize this thing, again, it was kind of spoiled for me in the trailer, but we find out this thing, it's going to be horrible if this happens, and then immediately go to the duel. And that is, I think, what makes it so tense, that it's this like catalyst immediately off to the finale there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a huge driving force, because if he loses, all hope is lost, and the bad guys essentially win in a way. That's kind of how you always want good versus evil. And well, I mean, this is kind of framed differently. No one really here was truly good. And there was clearly evil, so they definitely were flawed. But the tense moment of Jodie Comer dying because of her getting raped, and we as the audience saw it twice, not once but twice. We clearly see the impact and everything. So the fight was just so much more meaningful because of that, because we were worried, and because she was gonna lose her life because of something that because she was a victim of something. I felt like
it's what's very interesting is there's another version of this movie that is more of a court film, that it's focused more, it starts after the rape and is more of a court film, a he said she said, and it's a figuring out whether the rape happened or not. That is a way less effective movie. I think the whole point of this is how frustrating and how obvious it was that she was raped and she is in the right here. And we've seen it brutally depicted twice. I'm losing my voice. Sorry. We've seen it brutally depicted twice in a row. And I think that is why it's so important to see it and to have the uncut scene that you had to walk out of the theater for, just because that really adds just another level of like, it's so infuriating when she's in the court and they're telling her, well, if you are raped, you can't produce a baby. And they're telling her these things and they're being like, did you lie? Are you a liar? Who's right? The fact that we've seen it brutally depicted twice is what makes us so much identify with her in that moment. And that's, for me, when I completely stopped identifying with Matt Damon's character, is the moment where he makes her have sex with him, to be like, he can't be the last man inside you. I just think there's some brilliant writing there in the last act.
Yeah,
as well as some of the low points of the film, but I think there's some brilliant stuff they do in the end.
Of course. And I think that kind of just like after seeing Matt Damon kind of get pushed down and like, oh, he's a terrible person, we kind of have to root for him again because of what's the end of result and how terrible things are going to occur. So I think in a way it almost kind of brings Matt Damon up in a way where, like, even though he's terrible and everything, he's the only way that Jodie Comer is really going to get justice in this.
Yeah.
So now let's start to break down the fight. I really enjoyed this fight. I mean, Ridley Scott, we know how phenomenal he is. But I mean, this fight was amazing. Like, first of all, I could not tell. I mean, I really thought they kind of framed it in a way like where Matt Damon was gonna die or something, because the way that they charged the horses and everything, and Matt Damon kind of went all the way back, and Adam Driver kind of went back a little bit, but not too much. I mean, it was,
and he's the first one to fall off his horse. Matt Damon's
exactly.
The first one. He's always the first one to take a step down towards death every time.
Exactly. Every time he's almost on the way to take death, but yet Matt Damon finds the strife and he finds the way to kind of find a way to win in the end. But the choreography was so good, and the way that they kind of showed Matt Damon kind of putting himself back and forth and in the corner almost, the way that he was able to kind of overcome all that to kind of I guess do what's right in the end. And they didn't even show anything like of like a inspiring moment or anything. It just naturally he comes together and he finds a way to win. I thought that was just well choreographed. Especially, I also love the decision to have them not just on horses, but also to have it to have them like on ground and like fight hand to
Yeah.
hand. I think it shows for about like we're gonna settle this like men. You know, we're gonna do this the old-fashioned way. I think that was interesting. What were your takeaways on the fight
Yeah, I
or the
think
duel?
again, I think like I said, before, I think just the only way that duel works is if you tie Matt Damon's success to Jodie Comer's survival, and having her right there, so close to it, so obviously nowhere to run, is also another, I think, powerful moment. But the key moment of that duel for me was when at the end, where Matt Damon is clearly like about to. There's obviously it's brilliantly put together, and there's many moments where you think Matt Damon's going to die, et cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera. But that last moment where he's about to stab Jacques through the head uh, is just very that moment where Ben keep doing that. Adam Driver
yeah,
says there was no rape. There was no rape. He says that at the very last moment. He's like willing to say that with his dying breath. That's the most affecting moment,
yeah.
possibly of the entire movie. Because again, that goes back to this narrative of like what men are told is okay
Exactly,
for men to do. And this,
exactly.
again, it's clearly reflecting and it's making a commentary about our current society, being like,
Yeah,
men believe that he genuinely believes this was not a rape because of the things that he has been allowed to do his life, the things that the world has let him do have led him to believe this was not a rape, and that has allowed him to continue to go to his dying breath to literally, like, because he thinks of himself as an honorable man, he's not going to lie and claim to save his life. Literally, to save his life, to stop a knife going through his face, he will not say he raped her.
exactly. I do want to point on the one last thing, and I think what was so interesting about that, and it goes back into that theme, how Matt Damon was and John De La Cruz was better to Adam Driver slash Jack West's character. I think it just shows how he kind of holded Adam Driver to a better pedestal, and I think because of that, he kind of, even though they were at odds, or I think he did that not only because he's trying to prove that he's an honorable man or whatever, but also because eventually, at one point in time, they were friends. At one point in time, they did care for each other, and I think it just kind of shows him kind of showing how he's the better of the two. I mean, it's not by huge margins. Well, I mean, it is by huge margins. He's kind of honorable for the most part, even though he's abusive. Still, kind of good, I guess. He doesn't rape anybody. But back to the point, though. To the point, I think it just shows kind of how he's kind of just shows that he kind of was friends with him in a way, and it kind of goes back to the storyline again of how he viewed Adam Driver in a better pedestal. So I thought that was a very interesting piece of work there, and I liked how they kind of had that callback in the begin towards the end of that. I think that was huge, and also the intercutting of the scene. I feel like sometimes that cannot be effective. Sometimes it takes away from the action. I feel like this was very effective. The intercutting, because what so many times in the fight you see them fighting, and you have them cut to Jodie Comer's character. I feel like that was so well done and effective because of kind of
Mm-hmm.
you kind of realize what they're fighting for, and you also get to realize slowly kind of what she's going through this process because it's
Yeah.
about her. It's about her. If she they're fighting for her survival and everything, and it just shows you kind of like makes you kind of you're worried. You get to kind of get an on look glance of what she's going through, and it kind of makes you feel more tense and everything. And I just
Yeah.
love the way that they intercutted everything. I mean, what do you think about that whole process, though?
I think, yeah, I definitely, you're a director. I'm not, like, my mind doesn't immediately go to like how things are cut together unless it's like a very flashy shot. That's not something I immediately like jump to. But I think just the way there are so many moments where you're just convinced Matt Damon's gonna die in that moment, in that duel, and I just think it's put together very well. There's not really much else for me to say. It's just it is flawlessly put together, that last duel in the last duel.
Really great piece of work. Again, last duel it was well executed. I also like kind of how they had the ending moments as well with what is it? Kind of displaying the characters, and it kind of just showed how Jodie Comer's character was honorable
Yeah.
even after he died and everything like that. And
That is definitely a moment, and that to me, if you weren't quite on the fence, if you were still on the fence about whether this is Matt Damon is the hero or whether Jodie Comer's the hero, that's the moment where it becomes Jodie. I mean, obviously, it's become Jodie Comer's movie 10 times over.
Yeah.
But that is just the cherry on top. When you see that script, it says like, oh, by the way, he died 5 years later of like
Yeah.
dysentery or something. Like he died like 2 years later in a very pathetic way. And she lived on 30 more years, had a happy life,
Exactly.
and never took another never got married again. And basically like finally got to achieve everything she wanted. And it was just, that's like a perfect kind of cherry to put on the top of the movie. And it kind of gives us a little bit of relief at the end of the film too.
Exactly. I do. And it kind of just shows you kind of how they don't get into like more about, what happens like as a result of everything. But
Yeah.
more of, we kind of see that, oh, she lived a great life, and Matt Damon, his character eventually died, but in a disappointing way for sure. But I definitely did like that, kind of showing how faithful she was, and it just showed how noble and strong she was throughout the movie. And I loved how
Well, see, I read it differently. I didn't read that she was being faithful to. Now it's perfectly. There's many different ways to read things. To me, that last moment read not as she was not taking another lover out of faith to Matt Damon, but rather out of the fact that she never had any agency in her life and she never wanted to marry him to begin with. But like once he died, oh yeah.
All right, so Jodie Comer again. We kind of had the ending where they kind of revealed that Jodie Comer kind of survived at the end, and I think it showed kind of how, I want to say, maybe noble and kind of how faithful she was towards her marriage. And also another thing I think was that, I feel like I think another thing was, it was too hard for her to maybe bear another marriage, and it was too complex for her. And I think it kind of just showed, that she was being noble, number one, and also number two, I think she didn't want to get into that hassle and handle of it after how, I wouldn't say troublesome, but how hectic her first marriage was. So I thought that was multiple reasons for that. But what do you think of the marriage overall?
So I mean, I think that moment at the end, to me, I read a little bit differently. And there's obviously many ways to read every beat that happens in a movie, but
Sure.
to me, I read it as she never wanted to get. We don't know what she wants in terms of her marriage. It's never
sure.
discussed in her chapter, and beforehand, all we see is through Matt Damon's eyes, which we've already established he's an unreliable narrator, right?
For sure.
So we don't know what she wants in terms of a marriage. By what we see in her performance throughout her chapter, she does not seem to be interested. She seems to dislike being married at all moments. She never actually seems to like Matt Damon or like their relationship. So
Yeah.
to me, it read more as he died and she finally got peace, because ever since she was a child, she's been under the control of her father. Then her father chose for her to marry this other man without her consent. And then that other man, almost got her burned at the stake. So to me, it was like after he died, she was finally got the peace. This was her happy ending. This was like, she now has all of his wealth she's a widow now, and her husband left her all this wealth, all this money, all this land, all these servants. And now she finally gets to live and raise her child. Again, this is a moment where like, I don't know, like obviously this really happened, but like that'd be interesting. I would have loved to see, now they're never going to make a sequel to this because that's a bad idea, and also because it made no money. But I would love to see kind of what happens now, how she is treated in this world as a single woman, because that cannot be like a single lady ruling over an estate. That cannot be a good position to be in at this moment. But that's how I read that movie.
For sure. That, and then again, yeah, I like what you said. There are different ways of interpreting anything really in that film. So I thought, that was thing. And like to your point about how she was at peace, it kind of went into like, it was hectic. And I think she also just wanted to focus on her child as well, raising him. And I think it was a boy. I'm not entirely sure, but raising them in a responsible manner. And to make it kind of clear. And I feel like I think what happened, was I think maybe her father maybe got involved, and I think maybe the son got out of the estate. I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but I definitely did like how they kind of just had that tidbit at the end. I thought that was interesting. So I think we discussed mostly a lot of, we kind of hammered again last duel to the really well. And like you said, to the point where there unfortunately is not going to make enough money. And yeah, again, I think we touched on it, but I think it's a factor, a multitude of reasons. I think the pandemic affected Disney, and
Yeah.
marketing that whole thing.
That's an interesting point. I had not thought about the Disney thing. I know you mentioned it earlier, but I
Yeah,
think I don't think I actually talked about it. I think I hadn't thought about that. That like there really is no Disney's whole thing is they have to appeal to everyone. They cannot leave anyone
yeah,
out. They can't do anything even slightly controversial.
yeah,
Love Victor, the show about the really sweet like romantic comedy show about a gay couple was too like risque for Disney Plus. Like it is that they don't do anything that's even slightly controversial anywhere on the planet. So they were never going to be able to do anything with The Last Duel. This was never what they wanted their new company to feel like. And that probably had a lot to do with it where this just simply was not a movie. It's kind of like the New Mutants kind of had this this same thing last year. I think
yeah.
that movie was also terrible. I never saw it, but I've heard it's really bad.
I have to.
But that kind of had the same thing where like it wasn't the kind of movie they were making now. This wasn't the kind of it's just like one of those lost boys that kind of got lost after Disney and Fox merged. Although what is interesting is The Last Duel, I believe it went into production for a couple of days pre-COVID and then went back into production post-COVID. And I believe that was after the Disney Fox merger.
Yeah.
So they must have just already have sunk too much money into it, had too many contracts signed that they couldn't back out of it.
Yeah, I think like it's like the pre-production phase, and I think they had the similar situation with Free Guy. But Free Guy, I think it's not going to go on streaming though to Disney Plus, so it's kind of like in a weird position. But if you look at like where it was distributed by, it said it was distributed by 20th Century Fox. So I think like it doesn't say Walt Disney, but 20th Century Fox is bought by Disney, so it essentially was Disney kind of how they handled it. Now I think what was interesting though was you have similar films like Fox Searchlight, which technically is owned by Disney as well, but I guess I guess it wasn't a Searchlight picture, like kind of how the French Dispatch was. So I think it was a convoluted of things. And I was gonna ask then, and if you know, if you don't, it's fine. But do you know why they didn't like sell the rights to this film to like something like MGM, where House of Gucci is coming out? Do you know why that they kept it with Disney, if you know anything at all?
Well, so how it works, like production wise, is it's the company that. So it's not exactly that Scott Free owns the rights to the film and then gets to ship it around to a distributor. So I don't know how much I can say here that is public information, so I'll keep it vague because of like the inner workings of the company and stuff. But companies have deals with each other, right? And like a studio. So the studio, stop me if you know all this, but like a studio is basically the company that pays for the movie and then usually is also the same company that distributes it. The production company is the company that actually comes up with the idea. Usually sometimes the studio comes up with it, but the production company actually comes up with the idea, makes the film. They're the ones who is actually producing it and coming up, making the physical product, but they don't have the money to actually make the film. So probably what happened, I believe what happened in this case is that Affleck and Damon came to Scott Free with a script. Ridley attached himself to the script, and then they went out shopping to the different studios. 20th Century Studios or Pictures bought it, and then they own the rights. Then they own the script, they own the product that comes out of it. So it wasn't really in Scott Free's place to be able to ship it around to someone else. Now, if 20th Century had been like uninterested in the film and they did not want to release it, they could sell it to a different studio if they'd wanted to at any point. Now maybe no one else was interested in it. That's a possibility. Or maybe they themselves thought they could make money off of it, thought it could be a success for them, or someone was championing it at the studio. It's also possible they want Ridley in their corner. We do a lot of, I know we have other like actors and directors we make projects with that like the movies are never going to make money, but like we want that actor or producer in our family, so it could be that 20th Century just wanted Scott Free in their corner. So they wanted to keep the movie, even though it wasn't going to make money. So I don't know, but there's a lot of like weird, chess PC moves.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was a lot of logistics and stuff behind it. And, Last Duel, I don't think I think it's gonna be an underrated gem. And I feel like I really hope people do kind of see this. I think it's a good film. I mean, Adam Driver, Matt Damon. Maybe I think it'll do. I think it'll do better. Like after the 45-day release when it goes on a streamer like Hulu or Netflix, because it's a very engaging story, and it's harder. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's kind of hard for people to kind of see these epics and stuff like that happening when you have these other franchise films to go. But
Yeah.
if it's on a streamer, I feel like it'll be more successful because more people will be more interested in it. And the
Mhm.
conflicting reviews, I think, also had a factor into it, I think, as well. And nowadays people see review and everything like that.
Yeah.
But I definitely do think it was better with how it was reviewed. But yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely do hope people get a chance to see this piece. And one can only hope if the Oscars kind of do anything really with the picture. I think that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, they'll be interesting. Now, to your point, to kind of wrap up, and to wrap up here, so you work at Scott Free. I believe
Mhm.
you guys produced, made the movie. Do you guys know, kind of how do you guys view Last Duel? Do you consider it like a success or anything? And the question I'm really curious about is how and we may have touched on this earlier, but I'm not. But I want to rephrase it. But when you have these two films, Last Duel and another more famous film, House of Gucci, in there, how did you guys kind of view these two films? And did you guys prioritize one or over the other, or how did you guys kind of view that in terms of like just mark or like just like production and viewing wise?
So, because we are the production company and not the studio, and also I think it would be different if we were shooting in Los Angeles. We're shooting obviously in Ireland for this film, and I think we shot in, I don't know, Italy or something for Gucci. So it wasn't, neither one of them were shot here. We did a lot of the editing in house for Gucci. I don't know. I think Last Duel was still during remote time before anyone was in the office, so they were doing it through remote apps and different services like that. But um, I will say, because we don't produce the movies on site, we kind of farm it out again to like local production companies in Europe. um, we don't, and because we're also not distributing it, so we're not worried about marketing, we're not worried about all that stuff. That's 20th Century is doing that. Because of all that, I would say I don't have a great handle on how the company's like paying attention to these movies, how the company feels about these movies. um I will say that of my coworkers and the people who work with me every day in the company and everyone I've been speaking with, people are infinitely more excited for Gucci than they were for Last Duel. I personally thought Last Duel was more interesting than Gucci. I'll see Gucci. I think it's gonna be fun. It's not the kind of movie I usually like am drawn to. I prefer the kind of what Last Duel was promised to be, not necessarily what it was. I thought it was great what it was, but it's not usually what I react to. So for me personally, I was excited for the Last Duel, but I think overwhelmingly people are more interested in House of Gucci, and that's definitely the one that we're prioritizing as like the pinnacle of like our year, the capstone for our year 2021.
Yeah, that's interesting. And obviously I think, they're going to be huge for the Oscars, and I do think it will get nominations and stuff like that. So do you feel like it was do you feel like now I want to and I think it's a very interesting talking point. Do you feel like because House of Gucci is coming out, like this movie came out, I believe, October 15th, this House of Gucci comes out in another month. So do you feel like House of Gucci's effect at all had also, I mean, again, we talked about how there was a multitude of reasons, but I wanted to talk more about this thing. So we obviously have COVID, we obviously have Disney, we obviously have the pandemic, and we obviously have the reviews and the movies that are coming out.
Yeah.
I want to say though, how much of a factor do you think House of Gucci played into this movie's performance overall? I do you think that like if House of Gucci was not coming out this year, or not even like in a month, but was coming out, let's say like in February or March or whatever, do you think that because the two movies were coming out so close to each other and they're by the same director, do you feel like that was like another factor into like why do we want to waste our time into watching this Ridley Scott movie when there's another more fantastic Ridley Scott movie coming? Do you feel like because these two movies were kind of released at the same time had a factor as well, or do you think House of Gucci had any factor at all with this Last Duel production?
So this is not my area of expertise, but uh My guess is none. My guess is no, there is no correlation between the two just because they're so different from like, if you just watch the trailers next to each other, literally the only similarity between those two movies are the fact, well, Adam Driver is in both of them. There's that.
Yep.
But literally the only other thing is Ridley Scott's name is in both trailers. Like these are so very different films with very different audiences. I don't think anybody is made, and they're not, it's not like they came out, if they were like coming out on the same weekend. If it was like Gucci, that would be the weirdest thing ever. But like if Last Duel was trying to go up against Gucci and Halloween Kills like wasn't there, like that definitely they'd be competing. But I think they're separate apart. Like there's film nerds that are going to watch both because they're film nerds. Then there's like the audiences that are going to be more interested in them. I think a lot of people interested in Last Duel are going to be like men and like dudes and like fratty film bros, whereas like Gucci is going to be much more of the Academy audience. And I just don't think there's a lot of, especially since they are like a month and a half apart. I just don't. My guess is that there isn't a lot of crossover or like people considering one film over the other.
Now, I guess maybe not in like the audiences, but how about in the Oscars? And first and foremost, does your production?
Yeah.
Is the Oscars, is that going to be a factor then maybe about how the Oscars going to play into it? So how about
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
That's my guess. I think I touched on that briefly earlier. My personal guess is that The Last Duel will be completely forgotten by the time the Oscars rolls around, and Gucci is going to at least make a serious push for all of the Oscars that it can get. Again, unless it flops spectacularly and the critics hate it, but I don't think that's going to happen. It might flop, but I think the critics will like it. I think The Last Duel will definitely Gucci is going to make a huge push for the Oscars. I don't think The Last Duel. I just think like they care like 20, because obviously companies have to make a push for a film to win an Oscar. And there just hasn't been any conversation about The Last Duel. Nobody is talking about it. Even like some movies flop, but then people are still talking about them in LA. Nobody is talking about The Last Duel besides like the two of us and like my coworkers in our office, and that's just to be like, oh, did you see the box office is terrible? Like it's just not, there's no conversation about it. And I think unless 20th Century has no other films this year that they're like, yes, we want to push this at the Oscars, but they have Wes Anderson. That's obviously Searchlight. They have the French Dispatch with Wes Anderson over at Searchlight. So they have other movies. I'm sure they have other movies that I can think of that they're going to push for the Oscars. I just can't imagine that they mount a push for The Last Duel. MGM, on the other hand, has fewer movies. They're probably going to want to be like legitimizing themselves after an acquisition by Amazon. So they're going to be, my guess is that they're going to be pushing more for a movie that's Ridley Scott, Lady Gaga, Jared Leto is in it, I think, and like
Jeremy Irons,
Jeremy Irons. So everyone's in this movie, Al Pacino, all of Hollywood's in that movie. It's got, it's about Gucci, which is like, a sexy topic. People are going to be more interested in that movie, I think, and MGM is going to be more interested in pitching that movie to people.
For sure. So I guess to add on to conclude your point, so the production company has no like say whether or not what Oscars or anything. It has no say whether or not what happens in the Oscars, or it does, but not too much. Or it's more studio. It's more studio focused.
Yeah, I think the studio. So again, we're entering murky waters where I'm not 100% sure. My guess, because we've never had a big film the whole time I've been at. These are the first time we actually have films, like big major films, since I've started at Scott Free. We had like TV shows, we've had like smaller movies, but this is the first time like anything Oscar related. And I think it's mostly the studio. I think anytime you're dealing with Ridley Scott, he can get on the phone with anyone in town, and people will take his calls. So if he is like, look, I want you guys to push The Last Duel really hard, 20th Century might consider doing that just out of wanting to have Ridley on their team for the next time. That being said, I don't know that is necessarily the case. I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it's mostly up to the studio. The studios are the ones that, because like Ridley definitely wants an Oscar, right? Like another Oscar on his wall would look cool. I don't know if he won. Probably he's won an Oscar.
I think he said best picture noms, but I'm not sure if he's an Oscar. But
yeah, he's definitely been nominated for Oscars before. So he definitely wants one on his wall, But the actual bottom line, the one where it's actually going to affect their bottom line is 20th Century, because they're the ones who, well, Ridley's going to make money too, but 20th Century is going to make the most money off of this movie if it's successful, and the biggest cut if it's not successful.
Okay, so just to clarify, the studios have more say into it, and you guys, and as at Scott Free, it's not really much up to you guys. It's more about like the studios and whether they push it or not. So it's going to be really, and that's a good point. I think 20th Century Fox is going to push it for French Dispatch because again of that competition, and I guess House of Gucci, MGN, again, like you said, all of Hollywood's going to be in the movie.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. So I think that's an interesting thing, and I think it'll be an interesting thing to see how Adam Driver will perform in that House of Gucci performance. So definitely looking forward to that. But yeah, all right. So now that that's all said and done with, yeah, I think I think I want to say one thing about House of Gucci, and I'm excited for it. Is the next guy. I'm excited for Lady Gaga. Excited for Adam Driver. I am worried that my only concern, and I don't think it'll happen. Again, this is Ridley Scott. This is great production. I am a little worried that maybe the acting, like the way that they marketed and the way I am a little concerned that maybe the acting stars, like we have all these actors and stuff, may get a little too ahead of the story a little bit. I'm worried about that a little bit. That's my only concern though, but I don't expect that to happen. But what are your general thoughts and previews about House of Gucci, and what are you looking forward to it? I guess the most of it.
So I don't know very much about this film. It's not the kind of film I've like looked at, like thought about a lot or like considered a lot. I know there's a lot of screaming in it. I know there's a Christmas song plays at one point because that's all I could hear when they were editing it. Was there play a Christmas song at one point? And there's a lot of screaming. That's the only like stuff I can say that I know about it. But I would say, to me, I'm interested. The best thing it can be for me is like a little bit over the top, a little bit of that like Italian, we're going like almost Ryan Murphy-esque, like almost a little bit over the top, a little bit heightened reality. Just really fun. Lady Gaga hamming it up. Biopic with a twist. That's probably for me the best case scenario for it. But then again, I don't like these kind of movies. So I will watch it. I'm not like psyched for it. So like if it is a really slow plotting biopic that's really great and emotionally resonant stuff, I'm going to enjoy that less than if it's a little hammy and a little stupid.
All right.
Personally.
Yeah, that's all good. All right, so that's it. So now that we kind of touched the last duel, we touched on House of Gucci. Any more final thoughts before we conclude for the show? Sam, anything you wanna add on to the movie? Any final thoughts you want to put in there?
Just guys, go see it, please. Go see it. Get not just because I like my job and want to keep it, but because I like these original or semi-original films and I want them to keep being made. So go watch The Last Duel in theaters if you can.
Watch The Last Duel again if you want in the theaters. Go on Tuesdays. They're discount ticket Tuesdays as well. Sign up for AMC subs. It'll be $6.50. So again, sign up for that, and you guys will be only $6. It's definitely worth your time. I'll just say that much. It's worth your time. I had a great time watching it, Sam. I assume you had a good time watching it.
Oh yeah.
I had a good time. What you eat in the theater? I had some M&Ms and I had some water, and I also had sweet tart ropes.
So my go-to is always Milk Duds, unless a theater doesn't have them, which is just blasphemy. I don't know how a theater can not stock Milk Duds, but some don't because they're crazy. So yeah, that's my go-to is Milk Duds. I'm not a big popcorn guy. I sometimes do a big soda, but then I have to get up and pee, and it's like I went to a really packed showing of The Last Duel, so I didn't want to like be walking along the aisle. So yeah, I think I just had Milk Duds.
All right, yeah, Milk Duds. So that's the thing. Yeah, so guys, enjoy this film. If you guys haven't seen it, if you guys have stuck with us, again, thank you again for Sam Brooks, who will hopefully and probably will be joining us again for the House of Gucci. We're gonna get into all of that Hollywood esque thing. So stay tuned again for that podcast. We'll bring him back on. For that, we'll probably also bring him back on for a couple other films. I mean, this is a LA guy, he's huge. So we're definitely bringing him out for House of Gucci. But apart from that, this is probably a start for something. Again, Sam, you want to promote that podcast one more time? I believe it's the Screenwriting Life.
It's the Screenwriter Survival Guide, and it is.
Survival Guide.
every week. We're almost finishing with our first season right now. We have 2 more episodes in our first season. And we go all the way from like moving to LA and your first night in LA, all the way to our last couple of episodes are about getting into developing your script, which is just an adventure I'm starting on right now, with like getting into development with a production company. And festivals is our most recent episode that's coming out this upcoming week. I don't know when this airs, but probably it'll be aired by now. We've got some really cool stuff in next season. I'm very excited about that. I'm going into production on a film, and I'm going to be basically chronicling every step of the way with my director and with a bunch of other people who are working on the film. We're very excited about that. So yeah, if you go Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, or you can visit us online at screenwritersurvivalguide.com.
Again, the links will be in the description if you're watching on YouTube. If you're also watching on Apple Podcasts, we will also again provide the links for this podcast. Again, this has been Expressed and Refreshed. Again,